Greetings, monkeys, and welcome to the Dark Room. The two most powerful warriors are patience and time. If there is one part of the Warhammer 40k fandom that knows how to be patient, it's Eldar players. Neglected for decades in favour of Space Marines and, well, pretty much everybody else, Eldar players have been fielding models that are 25 years old or more for a long, long time. Up until about 3 years ago, if you wanted to field an Eldar army, you were reaching for the heavy metal. No, not that kind. Yeah, that kind. Thankfully, over the last few years, Games Workshop have been rewarding the saintly patience of all the Eldar fans out there with a gradual revamp of the range. After a shaky start with the Eldari reveal, GW finally dropped revamps of the Aspect Warriors that have been with us since 2006. These new striking scorpions really capture the sleek and deadly nature of these filthy Xenos and are packed with tiny details that really put the itch in your ADHD. Or maybe that's just me. So, with all the hype surrounding the latest reveal of the new Phoenix Lords piquing my interest in the Eldar once again, it's handy that last month's Mini of the Month was a shiny striking Scorpion Aspect Warrior. I absolutely love this Games Workshop promotion and have used models given away free by my local store in several videos for this channel. Someone at GW clearly knows what they're doing, because I'm currently eyeing up the glorious new Warp Spider Phoenix Lord with great interest. Sadly, I'm not quite at the level of the anointed ones who receive pre-release kits just yet. Call me, guys. Call me. So let's scratch that Eldar itch by bringing this striking Scorpion to life. The eagle-eyed amongst you will notice this model isn't quite built to the standard instructions provided with the kit. As I was working through the build process in store, it became clear that some young scamps had previously gotten a little excited when building their models and had been creative with their use of the parts. Thankfully, I was able to cobble together parts from 2 or 3 different models to create something pleasing. When kit bashing minis, pose is everything. It's helpful to think about through lines when you are posing minis. Lining this swinging chainsword up with the warrior's outstretched leg creates an imposing stance that makes sense to the viewer. By lining up the head with these elements, we create a sense of expectation as the warrior braces on their back leg, waiting for the moment to strike. Once our warrior is at the painting table, it's time to get priming. I give him an all-over coat of Signal Black from Molotov. This is easily the best choice for priming minis, as it requires no thinning, goes down smooth, and dries instantly. With the model primed, we're going to start building up the tones for the striking Scorpion's iconic green armour. When working out colour schemes, it's useful to think about triads. For this model, I wanted a bright green, but we want to make sure that the base tone is still very dark. I opt for Caliban green for the base, Warpstone glow for the midtone, and Moot green for the highlight. This will give us a good amount of tonal range and create some great contrast. I start with an all-over coat of Caliban green through the airbrush. As I mentioned in my last video, I've been using 99% isopropyl alcohol to thin my airbrush paints recently. This is a much stronger solvent than the flow improver and water mix I'd been using previously, and it can be difficult to find the sweet spot between too thin and too thick. It's advisable to create your mix in a separate vessel and pour it into the cup to make sure all the paint is diluted into the solvent. If you thin your mix in the cup of the airbrush, there is a tendency for the paint to clump at the bottom and splatter everywhere when it comes out of the nozzle. This is a lesson I learnt here without too much damage. It takes a little experimenting, but when you get it right, you can lay down rapid fire coats of colour and watch as it dries on the model instantly. With the Caliban green down, I move on to the mid-tone, Warpstone Glow. We're going to be employing a technique here known as volumetric highlighting. It may sound fancy, but it's pretty easy to pull off. We simply place the model on a flat surface and aim the airbrush at a 45-degree angle. Rotate the model while applying thin coats from this angle, and the effect will imitate light bouncing off the raised surfaces. Ensuring we keep the recesses and downward facing parts of the model dark will create a dramatic contrast. To push that contrast a little further, we're going to be employing a little colour theory here. The green and yellow of the armour make up 2 points of a triad on the colour wheel. The third colour we need to complete this triad is purple. I fish out my bottle of Liquitex Quinacridone Magenta ink and give the model a few passes from below, making sure not to miss my boy's sweet cheeks here. The magenta will darken once it's dry and give our shadows a nice tonal variation. I feel it's just a bit more interesting than opting for a darker shade of green and really makes the model pop. For the final stage of volumetric highlighting, we need to apply our highlight, Moot Green. This will be a much more precise application as we're paying special attention to the parts of the model that would be reflecting the most light. This pass is best applied sparingly, as we don't want to ruin the contrast we've already built up. We simply pick out prominent areas such as the head, shoulder and outstretched foot to give the model some dramatic lighting. You'll notice I take my nozzle cap off here, as this concentrates the spray cone on my airbrush and allows for a more precise targeting in this highlighting phase. Once I've got something I'm happy with, it's on to the brushwork. There is loads of great detail on this model. Sadly, the closed pose we've gone for is going to make accessing some of it tricky. For my base coating, I start on something easy, the straps and tassels. My go-to black is this Scale Colour Artist Art Black I picked up a few years ago. It came highly recommended from one of my painting heroes, Marco Frazzoni of the Not Just Mecha YouTube channel, and for good reason. The matte finish this black provides is so silky and it covers great after a little thinning down. I like the fact the black tone is completely flat with no subtle hues of blue or green to confuse the eye. This will serve as a great contrast against the bright and varied colour of the armour. Whenever I have true metallics to paint on a model, the first thing I reach for is my selection of airbrush paints from the Vallejo metal colour range. Don't worry though, we aren't going to be using the airbrush on these small details. I use these paints as thinners for their Citadel counterparts. Gold for Retributor armour, dull aluminium for Leadbelcher, copper for Balthazar Gold, and so on. I find the Vallejo paints improve the spotty coverage of the Citadel line, and the higher viscosity of the Citadel paints increases the surface tension of the Vallejo paints, making it easier to use them with a brush. These two lines of paints really do complete one another, so I encourage you to try this killer combo out for yourself. For the leather and the holster, I opt for a more desaturated brown of dryad bark to contrast with the armour. It can be pretty confusing to work out what is a belt and what is a strap on this model, and I think this holster strap here changes colour 3 times over the course of the paint job. This isn't something I worry about too much, as any mistakes can always be corrected with another coat of paint. With all the details base coated, I give the model a generous coat of Vallejo 100% acrylic resin gloss varnish and prepare for the wash phase. The reason we gloss varnish is because we're going to be applying the wash for this model with a Tamiya accent colour panel liner. This is an enamel based paint, so we can't thin it down with water. We must use white spirits. Sadly, I realised once I'd started that I'd actually run out of white spirits. Although this isn't an issue, even if the enamel is completely dry, a brush dampened with a small amount of spirit will reactivate the pigments and allow you to move them around again. The gloss helps with this, as the smooth surface created by the varnish doesn't allow any of the pigment particles to become embedded and spoil our bright surfaces. So just as a weird little aside, when I ran out of white spirit, I went to my local friendly art supply store and found this Loxley Eco Spirit, and it says the greener and safer alternative to white spirit. Sounds fantastic. Who wouldn't want that? So I got it home. I used it in exactly the same way that I would use white spirit normally. Got it on a palette, and I just wanted to see how it was going to interact with the enamel. And when I put it together, this happened.
This is some heresy, brothers.
Now, I don't know if there's any chemists out there that would be able to tell me exactly what's going on here, but that is an interesting reaction. Clearly, I don't want to be putting that on my model, so I went and got the real stuff, and we were good to go. But I was reading up about this, and it says that it's water-based. I don't really know how you can be selling white spirit if it's got water in it. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a chemist. If anybody is, I would love to know what the deal with this is. Eco Spirit from Loxley. I'm sure it has a use, but I have yet to discover it. Once I've gotten some proper white spirit and cleaned the model up, I matte the model back down with a few coats of Vallejo Premium Colour Matte Varnish and let everything dry. As you can see, we have some dramatically defined recesses now, and have managed to keep our raised surfaces nice and bright. Onto the highlighting. Because my brain is a strange thing, when I paint a model to a high standard like this, I often like to think about the process in terms of gambling. When we start, the stakes are low. We get our base coats down, everything is fast and loose, and there is very little stress. As we progress through the piece, however, the areas we work in become smaller and smaller, and the techniques we use become more precise. One wrong brush stroke in the later stages of a paint job could spell disaster. Of course, the currency we're gambling with here isn't money, it's time. The endless hours we pour into our paint jobs can stack up to create some pretty tense moments as we start to apply things like edge highlights and the dots on the eye lenses. This can be especially nail-biting around airbrush gradients, as the blended colours are pretty much impossible to correct. This tension as the piece comes together is one of the reasons I find painting miniatures so compelling. I like to start edge highlighting on the flatter colours. I ease myself into the process on areas where mistakes will be easier to correct, as my hands and eyes relax into the zen-like state needed for the more high-risk areas. Once I'm settled in, I start to pick out the yellow details of the armour. I don't want to go too bright in these areas, so I opt for the slightly orange-yellow of Citadel Avalon's Sunset. Finding the right angle is crucial for hitting these bands and straps, so I'm rotating the model a lot and taking my time. It's always better to try lining up your brush twice and paint the line once, as correcting mistakes at this point will not be much fun at all. With all the yellow details picked out, it's time to edge highlight the armour. I'm going to try something slightly different on this model. Instead of mixing in an off-white to the highlight tone like I normally do, I'm going to bridge the gap between the yellow and the green tones with a mix of the two. I slowly and carefully work my way around the model, again constantly rotating and trying to line up the easiest angle of attack for my brush. I did debate adding magenta edging to the purple recesses, but decided against it in the end. I didn't want it to seem as though there was a light source underneath the model, or to draw the eye away from the focal point of the head, shoulders and arms. As I was working my way round, I felt the front knee was a little dark. One cool thing about a matte varnished model is the slightly abraded surface actually absorbs water. I will sometimes use this property to do a kind of wet blending that I call drop glazing. I apply a very thin glaze to the surface so that it's damp but not wet. Then lightly dab a few drops of thin paint on and watch as the pigment is absorbed by the varnish. If you get it right, you can save yourself hours of glazing with this cheeky trick. Give it a try for yourself. We're nearing completion now, so it's time to get into some high detail work. When painting gems, the normal rules for placing reflections are a little different. As gems aren't quite opaque, the light refracts through the shape and is emitted at the bottom rather than bouncing off the top. For this reason, the brightest part of a gem should be in the opposite position to your light source. Here I'm using Corn Red and Fire Slayer Orange for the red, and Kantar Blue and Ahriman Blue for the blues. As Ahriman doesn't cover too well, I undercoat the area in white first so that the blue will really pop when applied over the top. We do still need to place a small specular highlight in the normal place, but just a small white dot is all we need to sell the effect. I apply the same technique for the eye lenses, holding my breath to get the tiny white dots in the right position. For the base, I decide to use some natural basing materials and try and match the colour to paint the tactical rubble our warrior is perched on. The sand I use has a slight tint of salmon, so I mix up some Tau Light Ochre and Cadian Flesh Tone. I've been doing some experiments recently with this cool technique I've seen Sergio Calvo use on his pieces. He uses layers of chaotic strokes to build up depth and texture, and I think that this works a treat on stone in particular. It's much more interesting than a straight dry brush, and it's actually pretty easy to pull off once you get going. I give the rim of the base a coat of black, the model a quick matte varnish, and it's on to the glamour shots. Patience can be bitter, but its fruit is always sweet. Although it's been a long wait, Eldar players finally have a model range worthy of the unique space elf aesthetic that we all know and love. The sleek curving surfaces and wandering lines of these new aspect warriors were a joy to paint, and below these old chunky boys straight out of the water. I'm super excited to pick up some more Eldar from the new drop, as some of these sculpts are absolutely mind-blowing. Who knows, maybe I'll even get round to painting my old Baharoth at some point in the future as well. If you like what you've seen here today, please do like the video, subscribe to the channel, and come follow me on the socials for more mini painting adventures. It always makes me happy when long overlooked factions finally get some love from the GW gods, and the last few years have been great for fans of the Eldar. The Eldar was actually my chosen faction way back in 2nd edition, so seeing these noble warriors brought right up to date with a HD revamp has filled me with a bittersweet nostalgia. Just goes to show, good things do indeed come to those who wait. Thank you, monkeys, and I'll see you next time in the dark room.